we can talk a little bit about the final. Like I said, my plan is to make it a project-based final, and so I'll give you guys the details on that soon. And basically, what it means is that um, you know, you guys will have a set of problems, and then you'll complete them in a Word doc or something like that, and then you'll send that to me. Okay. So it's not going to be a sort of thing where um, you've got a tight time limit and you've got to. I mean, I would kind of think of it more of like as a final paper, but you got to remember that the point is to demonstrate your knowledge of the material we've been discussing. So, you're going to have equations and graphs and things like that in there. Um, and that's I think the right direction to go in the current situation. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to solving problems. And I think that probably the best way to kind of finish off this material is to go ahead and do the Cournot model example, and then go ahead and do um, the leader follower model. And one of the things that we want to do, because this would be like a sort of thing that we would do when we're going to compare the welfare implications of these two models, is you'd also construct the competitive equilibrium. So let's do question number 1. Okay, and let's look at so question number 1 says, what quantity of output will the duopoly produce? And let's see. And let's do, yeah, and question 8. And so you can see that they're the same. So we're just going to compare our answers in questions number 1 and number 8 to get started. So go ahead and work on that, and I'll be back in a minute to ask you guys the questions. And obviously, you guys can talk amongst yourself. There's nothing that says that you guys can't discuss these things. But remember, the really important first step is to find the reaction function, and then go ahead and go from there. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Okay. Okay, welcome back. So let's see. How about Aubrey? How are you doing today? Are you there?
I'm okay. How are you?
Just okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. In fact, last night I went down to the beach and I saw the bioluminescence. I don't know if you guys
Oh,
read about it or not, but
I heard about it.
it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's yeah, amazing. And I was thinking to myself, like the first people that saw this, even even couple hundred years ago, they would have seen that and been like, "What?"
Yeah.
It would blow your mind because you wouldn't possibly understand why that was happening. So it's pretty interesting. Um, yeah, you don't normally see light coming out of waves. It's bizarre. Or ocean waves, I should clarify. Um, so okay, did you make progress, Aubrey?
I made progress on 8, but I didn't do 1 because I didn't know what the numbers were. I didn't see them.
Oh, they're exactly the same. That's the
Oh,
reason
they
why.
are. Oh,
Yeah. So
okay.
okay. So
But
so,
I got the answer for 8.
so you got the answer for 8. Okay. So do you want to share your answer for 8?
Do you do you want the total or do
Yeah,
you want do 2 first?
let's blurt it out. What do you got?
I got 24.96. That could
Tw-
be
20,
creative.
24.96. How many people agree with Aubrey? If you agree with Aubrey, raise your hand. Anybody disagree with Aubrey? Raise your hand. Okay, so let's stick a pin in it, Aubrey,
Okay.
and let's see. Efren, are you here today? I know you're here, but you got your mic.
Yeah.
So how are you doing? Did you work on 8 yet, or did you just do number 1?
I'm still working on it actually. I just got my coffee, so I'm still
Okay. Okay. I got my coffee too. I had my second cup. So how about Omnia? What about you? Omnia? Are you there? Oh, I don't know. Okay. How about Robin? How are you doing?
I am doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well too. So how did you
I just got the answer for 8.
for 8? Okay,
Yeah.
and did you agree? Did you get 24.96 also?
I did not get 24.96.
What did you get?
12.82.
12.82. Okay, that's a pretty big difference. So now we have 2 competing answers, which I would say 12 and 24, because you had 0.92 and I think she had 0.96.
Uh-huh.
So then we'll try to see. Um, uh, Greg, what did you get?
I am not done with number 8, but I did get number 1.
Okay, so
I'm almost done with number 8. Just give me a second.
okay, I'll give you guys just like 5 more minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about them. Okay, 5 more minutes. Welcome back. So now let's go ahead and we'll go back through the chain. So Greg, we were talking to you last, I think.
Yeah.
So what did you get for number 8?
For number 8, I got 41.88, but I know that's wrong because it's way
We have
off.
numbers off. So now we have 3 different answers.
Yeah.
What about Efren? Efren, did you?
Sorry. I actually went back and did number 1. to start right now.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
got number 1 out of the way first.
Since you got number 1, and so did Aubrey? Did you want to revise, or are you still confident with your answer?
What was the other answer that was given?
It was about half of yours. It was 12.92, I think.
12.92. I think I'm gonna try to go through it again and see what I did wrong.
Okay. Okay. So why don't we start by talking about, in both of these cases we need reaction functions, and the key reaction function that's going to apply to both of them, right, is going to be the reaction function for firm 2, the follower firm. So why don't we go through and we'll talk a little bit about the reaction function for firm 2, and then that should at least see if we're, should be drifting on the same page. So what did you get for the reaction function for firm 2? Can you type it in the chat, please? And so just again, do it like this: BRF2 colon. So the best response function is also the reaction function, and you just say Q2 is equal to some function of Q1, like that. And so whether you did question 1 or question 2, you guys all should have an answer for the best response function for firm 2. So Robin, Efren, Greg, Aubrey, and everybody else, Omnia, Noah, Daniel, Kyle, Ruben, Danny, and so on, John. Go ahead and type yours in. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you guys are on the same page, it looks like. Okay. So I'll say it aloud slowly. You guys have Q2 is equal to 16.25 minus 0.388 Q1. Okay. So that'll give you guys a basis to see that you're on the same page, and then I'll just give you a few more minutes. Okay. We're back. Okay, so Aubrey, I'll start with you. Did you have any revisions, or are you good?
I revised it a little, but I still got like a total answer of like around 24, so I got 24.12.
Okay. And
like
that's okay. That's okay. I think there's general consensus on the reaction function for firm 2. So at least we're at a, hopefully people aren't. What about you, Robin? Did you have any revisions?
Yeah, I was looking at my work and there's a lot of revisions, and I'm going through, and as I'm doing them, I'm finding more and more. So I'm just kind of, yeah.
Okay. Efren, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much almost there. I'm kind of stuck on this step right now, but I think I'm about to figure it out.
Okay.
But I have the reaction functions for both of the firms pretty. Oh, I mean, for the first form, I have their function, and I have the reaction function for firm 2.
Okay. What about you, Greg?
My number 1 lines up generally with Aubrey's number 8, so that's telling me my number 8's wrong. So I'm still trying to figure out what my revision is, but they should be similar, right?
Well, you mean like, honestly, because I haven't solved it, I don't know. there should
I
be
just
some
feel like they
differences.
should.
It's just how big of a difference. But yeah, I think there should be it should be different enough. So why don't we go ahead then and finish up question number 1, which should be the easiest one, and let's see what you guys have for the reaction function for firm 1. So there should be Q1 as a function of Q2. So why don't you guys go ahead and type in the chat your reaction function for firm 1. Okay. Yeah. And by the Danny's got 13.125.
I meant to put 15. I'm sorry.
Oh, you meant to put okay, good. At least we're there. And by the way, just so you guys know, as a general rule of thumb, yeah, obviously more accuracy is better. You know, but I don't think it should be a significant issue here. So okay. Does anybody disagree with those two reaction functions? No. Okay. So let's look. 22.84 for the total for the duopoly, which means that we should have firm 1 produces 10.76 and firm 2 produces 12.08. And that's the total. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, if you have a question, raise your hand, because if there are no questions, I'm just going to assume that everybody is copacetic. It's no big deal. Okay. And then for question number 8, the total industry output. Well, I will reveal for firm 1, 12.86. Okay. And just by way of comparison, we saw this a minute ago, but for firm 1, which notice firm 1 is, in this particular example, they're a high cost firm relative to firm 2. Their marginal cost function is everywhere above the marginal cost of firm 2. But because they're the leader, right, they end up producing more. And that's only because they're the leader. Because in the case that they're Cournot competitors, turns out that firm 2 produces more. So anyway, does anybody have any questions about that? It seemed to me that you guys and Aubrey, maybe you can tell me. It seemed like you guys were maybe, oh wow, wait a minute. Oh, that's the price. Good. Wait a minute. Okay, total industry output. Okay. Yeah, 24.12. Go Aubrey. Hooray, everybody's clapping. So is there anybody that has a question about this? What about you, Robin? Or did you figure it out, or is there a big?
Yeah, so the reaction functions are similar, same quantity, all that, but for this number 8, I'm having trouble getting to that 24.12, but I think that's on
Well,
my end.
just remember that in the leader-follower model, the leader, in this case firm 1, doesn't have a reaction function.
Yeah.
So if you have a reaction function for firm 1 in the leader-follower model, that's
Yeah.
yeah. What you do is you just take the residual demand, and remember, for the residual demand, what you do for the total quantity in the demand function, right, is you substitute in Q1 and Q2, and then so you'll have PB is equal to 1089 minus 26 Q1 plus 26 Q2, and then for the Q2 you just substitute in the reaction function for firm 2, and so the reaction function would be 26 times 16.25 minus 0.388 Q1 all together, right? So, and then you just have that reaction function, and then you can go ahead and you kind of simplify it because you just have one equation in it's not a reaction function, sorry, that residual demand, and you just have one equation in Q1, and then you simplify it, and then you change it into the marginal revenue function once you get to the simplified version of that equation by just doubling whatever the slope coefficient is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just need to go through the whole process and solve for that.
Yeah, so if you don't get the residual demand for firm 1, and plug in the reaction function for firm 2, and then simplify it into a simplified sort of residual demand for firm 1, then you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, that was my error last time.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and work on it, and make sure that you agree, and we'll work on the next problem, which is so I think probably it's this question 13 is really the one. Well, we talked about it last time, but I don't want to solve it in all of its gory detail. But what I want to do is I just want for you guys to formulate the competitive equilibrium. And so let's go ahead and work on question 13, and then compute the competitive equilibrium, and then we'll talk just a little bit more. Okay. Now, what about the competitive equilibrium? You guys, the only thing that's missing here, right, is we need the joint marginal cost function, which is going to be our supply function in this case. There's no ambiguity about it being piecewise linear or anything like that, because the marginal cost functions of the two firms are both rays out of the origin. So does anybody have a joint marginal cost function that they want to share with us? Okay. How about John? We haven't heard from you today. You got a joint marginal cost function for us, John? And we haven't actually heard your voice either, Ruben. You want to give us a joint marginal cost function? Or a supply function in this case? Okay. Oh, one new message here. Oh, Ruben's not there yet. So how about Omnia? How are you doing? I tried to talk to you earlier, but maybe you didn't hear me. What about you, Jin? Oh, yeah, right. Okay. So Jin's still working on it. And what about you, Shelby? How's it going? Shelby, did you hear me? Maybe she's away from the computer. Ricardo? Okay. How about Noah? Are you there? Okay, so everybody's still working on it. Okay, so I'll let you guys work on it for just another minute. Okay, welcome back again. And so Jin put PV equals 8.57 Q. Do you guys agree with him? If you do, okay. So 8.57 Q. So then we have a pretty easy road ahead, right, to compute the competitive equilibrium, because we have supply, we have demand, we can compute the competitive equilibrium, and then we can find out the net social benefit or the total surplus, and we can measure all of our other surpluses relative to that. So this is really what I wanted to emphasize today before we go on to our next and last bit of material. So do you guys have any questions about that? Okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing that, and let's go back to the whiteboard. Okay. And I want to finish where we started the semester, and that is the first fundamental welfare theorem. So so I want you guys to think about something for a minute. Noah, are you there? I don't know who has a mic and who doesn't. Obviously, some of the people who have already talked have mics.
Yeah, I have a mic.
Okay. So because this will kind of be a little bit easier to do as a chat. And I don't know if you can speak up a little bit because I kind of had a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay. I can
There
hear
we
you better now. So I don't know if you really have thought about this, but remember the first fundamental welfare theorem tells us that, and this is, just a basic summary of it, that competitive markets are efficient. Okay. And you probably remember that the important issue here is that, for a market to be competitive, it has to satisfy 3 conditions. Do you remember what the conditions are, Noah?
Not right off the top of my head, but I can look really quick.
Well, I'll kind of help you out because it should sound familiar. So there has to be no market power.
Oh, yeah.
And there has to be no externalities. And it has to be the case that, and I'll just put, there's perfect information. The perfect information one, we don't talk about a lot, but I told you guys before that a lot of people misunderstand perfect information and think that it only means that, or it means that firms and consumers have to know everything. There could be no uncertainty at all. And generally the results for perfect information hold up as long as there's symmetric information, meaning that nobody can trick somebody else. So it's not the case that, for example, the seller of a car knows something about the condition and quality of the car that the buyer doesn't, and that can cause some difficulty in the buyer determining what's an appropriate amount for them to want to pay for the vehicle. As long as consumers and sellers know the same stuff, then buyers can properly formulate a willingness to pay, and the seller can properly formulate their willingness to sell, and they're not going to be tricked by the other party in the transaction. So there we get efficient markets too. It's only when we have some informational asymmetries that there are problems. But what I wanted to talk about next, and this is by way of introduction, you should be familiar with the term market failure. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about, Noah. So you've heard market failure, right?
Yeah.
So do you know what that means? Does that have any?
I've heard the term, but I don't remember the exact meaning of it. But I do recognize the term though. Yeah.
You know what's the problem with this is because is it's an incomplete phrase, right? I mean, if you weren't an econ major, then you could think that there were lots of ways for markets to fail, but really what it means is that the market is failing to be efficient. So if you don't add that on, then it's just not clear. And probably the frustrating thing for somebody starting out is that economists will say, oh, this is a market failure, that's a market failure all the time. And I don't know So Jin, do you have a mic or you just have chat? Because only chat, yeah. So because otherwise I would kind of like, dig into a little bit more about your answer, because I mean, you're right. But hopefully you understand that's how we describe market failures, is that the market's failing to be efficient. And so this kind of gives you a clue that, when we look at the first fundamental welfare theorem, it tells us that competitive markets are efficient, right? So whenever we have a market that has market power, or it has externalities, or it has imperfect information, then that's when economists get concerned that the market will function, right? But it will function inefficiently. And remember, when we're talking about efficiency, right? Efficiency means only one thing. Only that, and I'll put total surplus, even though I prefer net social benefit, right? As a description. But it means only that total surplus is at a maximum. That's it. So all we're saying is that if the market is competitive, then total surplus will be at a maximum. If for some reason the market has a market power issue, and market power means that the firms can do something to manipulate the price. So the first case is monopoly, but it also happens in these other models that we've talked about, the Corno-Duopoly model, and it also happens in the leader-follower model. We also found out, though, that it doesn't happen in the Bertrand model. Remember, that's the model of price competition. We didn't have much to say about it. We just said, oh, well, when firms are competing on the basis of price, then they'll drive down price to where price is equal to marginal cost, and the Bertrand equilibrium will be the same as the competitive equilibrium. So it turns out that Bertrand competition, even though it only involves, in the simplest case, two competitors, it's efficient. You're going to have the same amount of total surplus if you have the same price. Because remember, when we're talking about total surplus, you guys should have a good picture in your mind of, for consumer surplus, it's that area below the demand curve and above the price. And when it's producer surplus, it's the area above the supply curve and below the price. And if the price is the same, then those areas are going to be the same. So there's no reason for us to think, as long as we come out with the same price, that there would be some inefficiency. So, in the case of monopoly, right, the price ends up being higher and the quantity is less. And you can have lots of other cases, right, where the market, is otherwise competitive, but it's prevented from achieving a competitive equilibrium. So the cases that we talked about at the beginning of the semester, where we had taxes and price regulation, price ceilings and price floors, or quotas, or something like that, well, then we're going to end up having these market failures. And remember, and even though I don't like the term, we can use it because it's widely used. We measure the market failure. So in econ, we won't just say, oh, the market's failing to be efficient and then throw up our hands and walk away. Then we begin to dig into, trying to measure the inefficiency. How big is it? And we measure the market failure with the concept of deadweight loss. So we can put a number on it. And this, these few lines right here, in a nutshell, is what all of Principles of Microeconomics was trying to teach you, and what my main learning objective is in this class. If you can successfully learn to identify when market failures are present, and all of the modeling that we're doing is helping us to put numbers on the size of the market failure, to measure the deadweight loss, measure the loss in total surplus. So I'll put in parentheses here, loss of net social benefit, because again, I think that's a better, more descriptive term than either deadweight loss or total surplus. But because those terms are very common, even though they seem a little bit too, what I would call, jargony for me, in our discipline, nobody is going to really question if if you use them in the right way, that if you know what you're talking about. But yeah, so the whole issue is, our business as economists, particularly in microeconomics. In macroeconomics, market failures don't really show up the same way. You might talk about output gaps or things like that. They would give you this sort of idea that, if the economy wasn't running properly, then you would be losing a certain amount of GDP that you could otherwise be having. But yeah, in macro, people don't normally use this type of language. Nevertheless, there's a lot more economists employed in positions where they're doing microeconomic analysis, analyzing particular markets, or doing analysis for particular businesses. And so, this is probably at least 60% or more of the type of issues that you guys will face. So yeah, the big idea is to try to get good at identifying market failures and being able to measure them. So and then usually, right, once you identify a market failure and the source of the market failure, then you have policies to promote competition. And here in the United States, a lot of that happens through the antitrust division of the U.S. Justice Department. And in Europe, they have actually an equivalent governmental entity called the European Competition Authority. So they're, in their title, right, they're actually trying to promote competition. That's how economists normally handle this stuff. And then you give advice to policymakers about how they might modify the rules under which the firms are operating to promote a more competitive outcome. Now, like I said, they, a lot of times, policymakers may not take the advice of economists because there's some other issue that is important to them other than efficiency. But I would say probably, most inefficiency has some, tangible cost that people can see. It's not just numbers on a page. When you see that, there's a shortage of housing that's caused by a price ceiling, rent control, and people aren't willing to rent apartments, and apartments are being converted away from apartments to condominiums, or they're tearing down apartment buildings and, you know, building other things there. You know, the inefficiencies are numbers to us as analysts, but normally they're real world problems that are obvious if the inefficiency is very large. So typically, when you point out a significant inefficiency to a policymaker, smart ones will pay attention because, you know, they don't want to see a lot of human suffering, if for no other reason that, you know, it tends to affect the way that people vote. So, but not in all cases. Sometimes, you know, smaller inefficiencies might be tolerated for what we'll just label political reasons, right? Not saying they're not good reasons, just saying they don't, you know, have directly to do with economic issues, and that happens sometimes too. But yeah, this is you know, a quick summary of everything that you guys have been learning in micro, and you know, that's important. Now, I will also point out one other thing, and I assume that everybody watched the videos that I suggested that you guys watch, and so let's just talk about that stuff a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a set of axes here, and hopefully the big idea is that we do have what you guys typically are going to see looks like a demand and a supply diagram. But here our interpretation is a little bit different. And that is, the upward sloping line is supposed to be the marginal social cost curve. And it has two components, a marginal private cost, which is the cost that we typically see associated with the supply curve. But it also has a marginal external cost, which means the costs that society bears that are not borne by the producer directly. The typical example that you give is, you know, the private costs of a firm that's running a factory that generates pollution. Well, the pollution imposes a cost on society in terms of health impacts. And as economists, we'd care about both of those things. So this is an example of a violation of the first fundamental welfare theorem that relates to the presence of externalities. And the curve down here is our marginal social benefit curve. And it has two components. It has a marginal private benefit, which is our demand curve. That's the benefit that goes to the person that buys the good. And it also has a marginal external benefit, right? So there are potentially benefits to people that are not actually purchasing the good. Now, if I was going to give you guys a really concrete, good, real-world example, I actually, you know, it's hard when you have both of these things, but we already nailed down the issue of pollution, right? And I'll give you guys, this is true story. There's electric power producer in a valley in Tennessee. So note that it's in a valley, and it turns out, I don't know if you guys know where Tennessee is, but Tennessee's, you know, a long, narrow state, and it's in the southeastern United States, and it's right on the border between latitudes where it would more generally snow and latitudes where it wouldn't snow. So if it was a little bit further south, you'd never get any snow in Tennessee. If it was a bit further north, then you get snow pretty regularly in Tennessee. Well, it turns out that this power plant in this little valley in Tennessee, because it's in a valley, it generates enough heat to modify the local climate so that it hardly ever, I won't say never because never is a big word, but the story is that it hardly ever snows there, not because it's too far south, but because this power plant's generating enough heat for the local, community that, they don't have to deal with snow. And so that's an external benefit, right? People out of the valley are consuming the electricity, the power plant's running, and it generates this benefit for the people that live in the community locally that they don't have to pay for directly. So and then you could add on, well, it's generating some pollution too, so maybe it's damaging the health of those people locally too. And so both of these curves could be moving. Well, the main point is that when we identify a quantity, and I'll label it Q star star, this quantity is what we would call the socially optimal. And what I mean by that is that it is the one that when you account for all the costs in society, this is the quantity that maximizes net social benefit, which we also know as total surplus. So this is the socially, and another way to say it is, I'll say i.e., in other words, right, the socially efficient level and the important thing to note is that, and just to be a little bit clearer, I will try to peg it to the equilibrium here. It's not going to let me change the color. Okay, fine. Okay. So it's this quantity right here. Actually, I can probably do a little bit better. By putting an arrow there. It's that quantity. Okay. So the important thing to note is that's the socially efficient quantity. It may coincide with the market equilibrium quantity. Notice that in the case that the market's competitive, our definition of competition is that there are no externalities. So if there are no externalities, then it'll just be the marginal private cost, the marginal private benefit. So I'll just say here, note in the absence well, actually, what I'm just going to put is this: marginal private cost equals supply, and marginal private equals demand, and that tells us absent externalities, the market Q star equals Q star star. So, okay. And so now I should talk with somebody for a minute. Danny, do you have a mic? Do you want to talk?
Yeah.
Okay. So Danny, the point that I'm trying to make here, and hopefully this is clear, is that the competitive market is not efficient because, so that's a reason for efficiency, right? It's not efficient because there's some like large group of buyers and sellers competing with each other, you know, and as if by the invisible hand it's magic. That's not why the competitive market is efficient. The competitive market is efficient because the quantity in the competitive market is the one that balances marginal social benefit with marginal social cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really our guiding principle. What we're really looking for is, if we want to maximize, and I'll just say total surplus, but notice that total surplus, normally the way that you guys are used to it being defined, total surplus is just about consumer surplus and producer surplus. But here there's more than consumers and producers. There's these third parties that bear costs, and we have to consider their costs because there's part of society too. But the main point is that there will be maximum net social benefit at the quantity where marginal social cost is equal to marginal social benefit. And it's just that the market, when it's competitive, there are no externalities and so forth, happens to deliver us that socially optimal quantity. It's kind of like, and economists use this language, is the competitive market is a mechanism for achieving a socially optimal outcome. It doesn't define what a socially optimal outcome is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I had another question while I was watching the video yesterday. Positive externalities cause inefficiency too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, like I said, you know, it's kind of a trip. You know, like a lot of people would think, oh, well, you know, like I gave the example of the firm in Tennessee. Assume that they generate their power through something like geothermal energy, right, which is super clean. If they're still providing a benefit to the community that's not captured by their sales of electricity, because that's their product, right, then there's still an inefficiency in the market, because it means that that additional benefit of warming the community and changing the local climate isn't being captured by the firm that's producing that benefit. And the only reason that's bad is that if they were able to capture that external benefit, then they would have more money to employ more resources to do that in a maybe a better way, right? Maybe it's the case that you know, they're electric power plant should be a little bit bigger than what it is. And we know this happens in businesses, right? When businesses get more revenue, they expand, other things being equal. So if somebody is doing something that's a benefit to society, a benefit to other members of the community, and they're not being compensated, then they don't have the incentives to scale their activity to the right level. And it's not something like, well, you know, the scale should just be bigger for, some crazy weird reason. It's that no, right? If they had a little bit more money, if they were able to capture the revenue associated with that benefit, then they'd be able to buy more resources. They'd be able to make their plant more efficient, or keep it from depreciating as fast. So yeah, positive externalities can be a source of inefficiency, just like negative externalities can. In fact, to give you guys another really concrete example, and probably the one that's a biggest concern right now, has to do with global warming. And so on the global warming front, you hear about, well, there are lots of countries like the United States and China that consume a lot of energy, and we're producing all these greenhouse gases, and that's a negative externality. But there are a lot of countries like Brazil and Indonesia that have a lot of rainforest, and the rainforest is a sink for carbon. So they're actually cleaning CO2 out of the atmosphere and providing a buffer for the climate by doing that. And so there are lots of countries that are interested in trying to support that carbon capture activity in the rainforests of the world by subsidizing those countries, by giving them money to preserve their forests, because they're helping out with the global climate.
Wait,
And
who's subsidizing them again? Who would you say?
well, so the United States
Yeah.
and other countries give money through various, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and through, direct contributions to these countries, so that they'll preserve their rainforests. And there is a real cost to those countries. Like Brazil, I don't know if you guys know, but they cut down a lot of their rainforests for agricultural purposes. And so in the absence of any sort of payment to stop them from doing that, then their next best alternative use is to cut down the rainforest and use it for agriculture. So at least by providing a subsidy, the UN does a lot of this. But remember, the UN is the United Nations, and they get their contributions through UN members like the United States and other countries. But they use that money to basically pay Brazil and Indonesia to not cut down their rainforests for agricultural uses, and to preserve it as a carbon storage device for the global climate. And so again, the main point is that the rainforests provide this external benefit, and if there's no payment, then there won't be the efficient amount of rainforests. Rainforests will be used inefficiently for agricultural purposes, just because there's no way, absent some sort of payment by, in this case, foreign governments, to encourage Brazil to do something else with their rainforest. That incentive won't exist, and so we'll have and it's not that there would be no rainforest in Brazil, because they'll just cut down as much as they need based on their agricultural uses. But we'd like them to stop sooner, because as long as there's a payment on the other side, they can consider that it's not just their own personal agricultural uses that should be considered for that rainforest, but also the additional benefit that they're providing the rest of the world, and the rest of the world's willing to pay something for it. So tropical deforestation and rainforest preservation and the money that goes through the UN, the rationale for those types of expenditures, a large part of it these days has to do with climate stability. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say to you guys today. And we just have a few minutes left. And just so you guys know, what I'm planning to do next week is post the details for your final project / assignment. And what I'm thinking about doing right now is saying, pick 3 models, in addition to competition, because that's fine. Pick 3 models that you've seen in the semester, and explain when a market failure arises in the context of those models. So, and obviously your explanation would involve, some equations and some quantification and a little bit of discussion about the sort of things that we talked about today. Do you guys have any questions for me? Okay, so if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand.